Well, my name is Steve Schmidt. I'm the chairman of the programs committee here with the Delaware County Historical Society. And thanks for coming. That's a big crowd here tonight. Luckily, we had a huge downpour at 3 o'clock that didn't affect the parking, so that's a good thing. And
take a poll of how many are alumni.
so with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Bev Larson. She's a graduate of Otterbein in the Ohio State University, where she majored in French, Spanish, and education. So with that, and you can also enjoy scrapbooking and gardening.
I'm Bev Larson. I'm a volunteer at the Delaware County Historical Society, and I have been doing research on the girls' industrial home, which had many names, for about 7 or 8 months. My background is I was a teacher at Olentangy High School for many years. I retired in 2007, and then I started volunteering at the zoo because otherwise I would sit on the couch and eat bonbons all day. So now I feed giraffes quite often, which is my absolute passion. So we're going to talk today about the girls' industrial home. It had many name changes, so I will eventually address those changes. This is the agenda. Why I'm interested in the home, why did Ohio need a reform school, the location, why the girls were sent there, and there were many different reasons depending on the age, the time period. The cottages, their daily life, a very tragic case from 1901 that I'll probably go into more detail than you want. Some matron's memos, and these are really funny. I mean, it's kind of sad that she had to issue so many memos, but if you've ever worked in any kind of institution or with a director or something, you'll notice that sometimes they write a lot of memos that might not be necessary. Hers are funny. Log of escapes, and then some experiences from more recent inmates or graduates of the society. So this is what piqued my interest in doing this presentation. I was cataloging a postcard one day at the Historical Society. This is a postcard that was found in our collection. It had been there for we don't know how many years, but we hadn't really cataloged it. So I saw this and I was like, oh, this is really interesting, because I had lived across the street on Home Road, across the road from this institution for about 10 years, and I was just totally intrigued. So it says, "Dear Anna, received your card. Many thanks for same. This leaves us all well. I hope you are well and enjoying the winter. This is cottage number 8, where the colored where the colored girls live. There is 110 in this cottage, and you'll notice that later I'll say there are 40 or 50 per cottage, so there's some discrepancies. Wish you could come up and see us. We'll write you a letter when I get time. With love to all, from Ella." And this is from 1909. Well, for one thing, I didn't know who Ella was, and I kind of assumed that she was a girl who lived there. And I later, after doing a lot of investigation, I'm like, oh, it was probably an employee, because when looking at the census, there were some employees with the name Ella. But at first I thought, well, this is a girl who lived there. And then I was intrigued too, why were there postcards from this place? And it turns out that there are a lot of postcards that people bought and sent. And actually, when people were in the newspaper, when they were listing property for sale, or they were talking about social events, they'd say, "Near the girls' industrial home." Like, that was a good thing, and which kind of surprised me, but it was a landmark that everybody knew at that time. So why did we have a reform school? Well, most states established reform schools or facilities for juvenile offenders in the 19th century, in the mid-19th century. And the main reason was because if they were sent to an adult facility, they thought, well, they'll become worse, which makes a lot of sense. So in 1869, the State Reform and Industrial School for Girls, the original name, was created, and it was on the grounds of Ohio White Sulphur Springs Resort, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The purpose was the reformation of exposed, helpless, evil-disposed, and vicious girls. And then in 1878, they added the term incorrigible. But I found that there were a lot of other reasons girls were sent there. And the first 6 girls were admitted in October 1869. So the public perception was one thing, and what they intended was another. So 50 years after the start of the school, somebody wrote in the Dayton News, when the school was established 51 years ago, its purpose was misunderstood. So its founders had the aim of instructing for girls employment and reformation of evil-disposed, incorrigible, and vicious girls. But the public just saw it as a place of punishment, which I think people do still feel like a reform school, punishment. And not so much, let's instruct them and improve their ways. So no shred of the truth of the reason for establishing the reform school was shared with the public, or the public didn't believe it, which I find sad. The location. So if you're familiar with Delaware County at all, the institution was, and it's all gone now, was on the banks of the Scioto River, on the west banks, at the intersection of Home Road and State Route 745. And so I kind of pointed that out there with a little bit of reference, or a little bit of, you can see some of the markers and so on. And I'll show more maps. Now, where did I live? I lived on Home Road. So I was technically not across from the girls section, the old Victorian homes. I was across from Riverview School for Boys, which became Riverview for Girls too. I don't know. They kept changing the names. So I was across from that, and my mother worked there in the business office at Scioto Village. And so she had some contact with the girls, mainly when they had money, some funds that they needed to want to buy something in the store there, or when funds were sent for that girl. And then they had various times when they would have events that employees would interact with the girls, they'd have picnics and so on. So she had a good sense of what it was like. She would tell me, well, there was a private phone number that if there were escapes, she would say, you know, call, and I'll talk more about that later. So you're probably familiar with the Home Road Bridge. And this is what the Home Road Bridge looked like from 1860 to 1913. It was a covered bridge, and then over there on the left side of the bridge, there was that was where the institution was, and it started out, of course, as White Sulphur Springs. So what was White Sulphur Springs? It was a very fashionable resort. It was where people came for medicinal properties of the mineral waters, and many people came from the south, especially from the south. So obviously during the Civil War, they weren't going to be coming up north for the mineral waters. So the company went bankrupt, and in 1869 the state of Ohio acquired the resort when it went bankrupt. So it was quite the resort, very fancy. This is from a 1858 engraving of it, and I have a couple more pictures that that'll show a little bit more of the grounds. So this is over on the right. This is the where the sulfur springs were. And actually, in 1820, 2 men had been boring for salt, which is a very valuable commodity. And they got down to 460 feet, and they struck a spring of mineral water. Well, this is better than salt. And so that's the water that is still there. The spring is still there. But, and the gazebo is still there. So the gazebo was originally part of White Sulphur Spring. If you lived in the area when the institution was still active, they would decorate that at Christmas time. They put all kinds of lights on it, and you'd drive along the river and say, oh, there's the gazebo. And the gazebo's still there, but that's the only building left. So the fountain in the center is fed by that natural spring, and it is capped now, but people used to go and drink some of the water for medicinal purposes. This was the hotel. It became the administration building. Several administrators and their families lived there, including the superintendent, the clerk, the storekeeper, the school superintendent, because the superintendent of the facility and the school superintendent were different people. And then there was a housekeeper. So it was a very large building, very fancy. So I'm going to show you a series of postcards. I told you that there would be postcards, and what they say is irrelevant probably, because they didn't live there. They were just passing through and bought it. They may have bought the postcards in Delaware or Powell, I don't know. But it was just kind of interesting that people bought postcards. Very fancy. Okay, now some of the administrators. I'm not going to go into depth on administrators because there were many over the years, but I was really starting out interested in the early days. So this is Colonel Crawford and his wife, Sally, and from 1891 to 92, well, in 92, he earned $100 a month. Okay, and his wife, she earned $400 a year. And I bet she had a harder job than he did. Yeah. And then some staff. And these are some of the housekeepers and a matron over on the right. And I don't think I know how much money they made. Probably not enough. But these are the ones that actually lived with the girls. And then, okay, this guy is important. Superintendent Stiles and his wife, and she was a matron. And he was a captain. He'd been a captain in the Ohio Cavalry. And so they called him captain. And he was around for 1889 until 1902, and that date is of its significance. And then his wife was Jane. And you would read a lot I looked in old newspapers, the predecessor of the Delaware Gazette, and they would be in the social pages, you know, the Stiles did this, the Stiles had visitors, this, you know, they were important people until they weren't. Okay, who were the inmates? I don't know that they all looked quite like this girl. They were from poor families, broken homes. They were neglected, abused. They were school dropouts, runaways. Some parents sent them there for their own good because they were willful or incorrigible. Some girls were orphans. They had no place to go. Some of the girls requested to go there, which is very sad. They had nobody to take care of them. And the youngest were 8 or 9 years old. In the 1930s, late 1930s, a woman named Fay Bell Burns, who was a student at Boston University, she wrote this as part of her, did research as part of her master's thesis. And so she interviewed girls and why were they sent there. And this I found online, and I typed it up so that you could read them. I did not wish to live with my mother or stepfather, so I told them to send me here. This is a white girl, age 16. My father started running after women and was not feeding us children. A Negro girl, age 17. I went to the court and asked them to help me at home. My mother was leaving drunks lying around, and they hindered me with my studies or my lessons. Mother told me I could stay at home if I kept my mouth shut. White girl, 17. My mother's insane. She was in a hospital for about 8 months. My father usually let me do what I pleased. A white girl, age 12. And the fact that they're mentioning their race is interesting. In newspaper articles that I was researching, they would say so-and-so was sent to the girls' industrial home. And if it was a white girl, they didn't mention the race. If it was a colored girl, they would say, so-and-so, colored. I find that very offensive, but that's what they did at the time. My father was arrested for question of rape of his daughter, meaning herself, and was sentenced to a year in the workhouse, Negro girl, age 15. I have never seen my parents. I lived with my foster mother, and she told me I would never amount to anything. I guess I just grew up with that opinion in my head. White girl, age 16. A lot of people blame my father, but it was not his fault. It just happened that after my mother died, I didn't have much to live for. So she was probably extremely depressed. So those are some of the reasons. And of course, girls were sent there for committing crimes, but in more recent years, it was very serious crimes. In some of the early years, it was not so serious. So now a series of pictures. So this is a general view, and again, all these buildings are gone. There was a fountain, and on the left, you can see the fountain, and it had an umbrella over it. And so this is a little bronze statue of two cherubs. And originally the umbrella was part of the structure. It eventually disappeared, but water would then flow over. I wish I could have seen that. And I was on the grounds a couple times, but I never, it was, you couldn't just go and tour, so I never saw that. There were cottages, some cottage, huh? If you ever camped or went to camp, these were not what we would consider cottages. So in the beginning, there were 8 cottages. There was a school building, a hospital, and each cottage would house 40 to 50 girls, and an assistant matron, a teacher, and a housekeeper. So the teachers lived on the grounds. Here were some more cottages. Again, not bad, except they were probably old and drafty. And then there was the hospital. So the operating room was on the 2nd floor upstairs, where that big light is, because it was a northern light, and so it was better light for operating. And then you can see at the top right, some of the girls in the hospital. Probably these may have been nurses that were employed there, but they may have been girls helping other girls. And then the bottom picture is a more recent photo. So we had this school building. It was there it was the new school building, 1897 to 1992, and then auditorium and classrooms. Unfortunately, there was a fire, maybe fortunately because the buildings were old. There was a fire in February 1879, and it destroyed several of the buildings. Now the state did rebuild structures, and over the years they added many more buildings. One of those was a log cabin, and it was built in 1920. It was used for picnics and camping area for the girls, and that was eventually destroyed or taken down well before the whole school was closed, because I think they just wanted they didn't want such fun things for the girls, to be quite honest. So it's gone. Here are some services or some facilities in the early years. They had laundry, girls worked in laundry. They learned sewing and then industrial arts. So those are some of their facilities. And then they had, in the cottage, each one had a dining room and family rooms. And they had strict rules what they could do in the dining rooms and family rooms. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Bedrooms. I don't know that these were typical. I really don't know. I have floor plans of the different cottages, but the more recent ones and showing how big they were, but we don't know what they were really like. And then the cottages were segregated. So the postcard that I showed you earlier, that was cottage 8 where the colored girls lived. And these are undated photos. So I went down to the Ohio History Connection, and that's where I got some of these pictures. Some are online, but none of the photos were dated. Okay, now the tragic case of Nora Ferris. Of course, there's no photo of her, but Nora was born in Jackson County in 1884. Her father's name was Benjamin, and I know that from a newspaper report and also a census, but that's about all I know about her. I don't know why she was sent there. When I was at the Ohio History Connection, we were supposed to be able to read some of their records about why they were sent there, but those records had been sent away somewhere else, another part of the state. So for privacy reasons, I'm like, okay, she's been dead for 170 years. Doesn't matter. So we couldn't see them. So she was listed in the 1900 census as an inmate at the girls' industrial home. She was described by matrons, not on the census, but described as being willful. And she died of heart trouble on September 15th, 1901. But she had been put in a straitjacket and tied to a metal bar in the strong room in her cottage. And Mrs. Sellers, the matron who administered the punishment, soon left the state and no charges were filed against her. So let me read a little bit about the strong room. They had quite an investigation about this because people were appalled, obviously, that a girl could be put in a straitjacket and left. So this was a letter from a young girl who knew Nora and was there at the time, and this was written to the Governor Nash, in 1902. She said, "When I first went there and had only talked to the officers, I thought I had struck heaven. Punishments received by girls at the home were something beyond telling. For instance, the straitjacket was one of the most cruel and dangerous ways of punishment I ever saw. The jacket is made of strong ticking, fitting tightly around the waist, with sleeves that touch the floor. When a girl does anything bad, such as talking over punishments," I guess that she meant talking back about a punishment, or tells a story, a lie, or does something that she does not intend to do, like it was an accident, she didn't mean to do it, it is within a short time that she is taken to the room upstairs, known as the strong room. The room is rather small with iron bars on the windows, and she's put in this jacket and laced up tight. Her arms are crossed behind her and brought up over opposite shoulders. I can't even begin to do that. And the strings are brought up around and tied in a knot over her lungs. You know, this girl, a girl has very little chance of breathing. Governor, I was in this straitjacket twice myself. She names the matron. So such was the case of the unfortunate Nora Ferris. I was on the same family, meaning the same cottage, and for a long time she had complained about feeling sick. Mrs. Myrtle Sellers, the matron, did not like Nora for some cause, and everything she'd done that didn't suit her, Mrs. Sellers take her up and paddle her until she would be black and blue. And when the coroner examined her, he claimed he didn't see any bruises, but other people who saw the body did. People with less stature than the coroner. So the paddles they used were obtained by Mr. Smith, the carpenter, who made them very hard wood. A girl would kneel over a chair and be paddled simply on her underclothing. The more she cried, the harder the officer would punish her. And poor girls, many are the paddles that are broken on the girls. I could not say myself if Nora died in the jacket, as I did not see her. I saw her a short time afterwards, but wouldn't exactly say why she died. So that was from a young girl named Ida Kurtz, lived in Marion. So there was a position, and remember this guy, Captain Stiles? Well, there was the inquisition into the kind of punishments that they were doing at the facility, and he was not fired, but eventually the inquisition got a little too uncomfortable for him. So he and his wife did finally resign, but there was no discipline for the matron, Mrs. Sellers, because she left the state. She went to another institution, I think in Illinois, Indiana. Yeah, very sad. So this is the cemetery where Nora is buried. It's called Ohio Home Cemetery, and it's on the grounds of the industrial school, the former industrial school. And it's on a hill, and there's a circle, it's a consecutive circle. The oldest graves are in the middle. So this shows the location. Well, you can't see where my finger's pointing, but the location, so it's along the river, and you can see where Home Road is, where the top arrow is, and then State Route 745. But this is, the cemetery itself is where that big circle is, and it's close to the river. Okay? Now, I tried to go there recently because I wanted to see for myself. I'm kind of interested in old cemeteries, but you can't get there now. But because the state owns the land, they are eventually going to open it up and people will be able to go to the cemetery. But somebody has taken pictures of every grave, and then I went to findagrave.com and found some things that are listed for these different girls. And so there are more than 72 graves in the industrial school cemetery, dating between 1872 and 1937. Most are before 1910. So most people believe that, including some former employees, well, they all died in some epidemic, and that's really not the case. There were different reasons. One girl had been burned, not in a dormitory fire, but just, I think she did something to cause a fire, and she died of burns. One really tragic case was they were trying to find the family. There was put a notice in the newspaper, couldn't find the family of a girl who had been sent there, and that just breaks my heart. So Mary Crabb, age unknown, was one of the girls. Florence Grifton, age unknown. Anna Mae Hayden, they're seeking the relatives. And so they would put notices in the newspaper for many of them, but not all. Really sad. So when it's opened up, and it will be several years until this is available for people to visit. Unless, in fact, I do know somebody who has gone there recently. They just kind of park and walk up the hill. So now that I know exactly where it is, if anybody wants to accompany me, I'm willing to go. So what was their schedule like? I don't have the schedule for the early years, but in 1940, we do have a schedule, and this was in the summer, so it would have been different in the school, in the school year. So they got up nice and early, 6:30, 7 o'clock they had breakfast, 7:30 to 11 they worked in the garden because they grew their own food. They had gardens and they grew their own food. 11:30 lunch, and 12:30 to 3:30 they get to work in the garden again. Now imagine July working in the garden all those hours. From 1 to 4 training, so I think that would be the laundry, the sewing, the industrial arts. I'm not sure because they didn't go into detail. 3:50 to 4:30 choir and orchestra. 5 they had supper. 6:30 to 8 they had recreation. I don't know what that consisted of. And then 9 o'clock lights out. It was kind of a busy schedule, I think. So music, I mentioned that they had choir and orchestra. Music played a big important part of their lives there. So they had bands, orchestras, choir, and separate orchestra at one point. Because like I said, they were segregated. Not forever, but in early history days, they did segregate them. Here's another choir. They could go to church. On Sunday, they could sing in the choir. These are some girls in uniforms. This was not the typical uniform, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. They would have plays. They could do reenactments. This was probably around Thanksgiving, so they were doing a reenactment, and I think they really enjoyed that. And also, at one point, in the 90s, in the auditorium, Olentangy High School, the original Olentangy, did not have an auditorium. So they came and they went and used the auditorium there at the home. And that's when I was actually on the grounds, but I don't remember much about it. I mean, I remember the play. And they did a presentation for the girls, and the girls hooped and hollered because the play I saw was barefoot in the park, and there was smoking, swearing, and girls going around in really small PJs. So, yeah, they kind of enjoyed that. So here's, again, undated and no identification for what the events were. But I think you might enjoy seeing some of the pictures. So the one picture, it looks like the girls might have had diplomas. On the right, it's definitely their diplomas, graduation from William K. Willis High School. Now, William K. Willis was not the Willis that Willis School in Delaware is named for. He was a black man, so I think this was a different, definitely a different person, and I like the fact that they did name it after a black, I think he was an athlete, but I'm not sure. Here they are lining up on the line. I don't know why, but I'll read you some information about what they were and weren't allowed to do on the line. Gardening, and this is obviously not early days. And then they had a rabbit house, they raised rabbits. There was a bakery on grounds, I don't have a picture of that, but there was a bakery, their food came from there. Now I'm going to talk about Mrs. Rose Beatty, superintendent. She sent memos, lots of memos, and I loved them. So you probably can't read those, but I'll read some to you. The matrons had instructions from me that the new girls' plaid dresses, so again, uniforms, are to be worn for 3 months, at the end of which time they are to be turned into the sewing room, and they had to be clean. If the girl has not been to the sewing room by this time, she is to be sent to the sewing room to be fitted out. Please keep this notice for future references and see to it that this policy is adhered to. Rose C. Beatty. Matrons, this is from 1939. The following schedule has been set up for the discipline of runaway girls and the wearing of stripes. New girls who have been on the farm for less than 3 months will wear stripes for 2 weeks. The girl is to remain in her room for 1 day after being returned from running away, and spend her free time at the cottage in her room for 1 week. First offenders will wear stripes again for 30 days. If they're repeat offenders, they have to wear stripes for 60 days. When a runaway girl returns to school and training, she is to be sent under the escort of a trusted girl. In April 1939, the increase in the number of runaways has become alarming. And this points to the carelessness of the staff. Now, there were not fences all around the facility, so they really could walk away, and they did. If a girl escapes during recreation hours, the supervisor in charge will be considered negligent. It is my feeling that there's not enough care and thought into watching these girls. Matrons, 1939 again. Your girls were out in cold this morning in anklets. This is from March 27th, so it was cold. And they had on short jackets. The order has gone around often that these jackets were all to be put away during cold weather, and only long coats were to be worn. No anklets should be worn during this kind of weather. Each matron should stand at the door and inspect her girls leaving for school or trainings. Each girl should have on, as a minimum, brassiere, shorts, long socks, dress, and long coat in this kind of weather. April 21st, 1939. This is an important notice for everyone. Do not send the girls out in the pouring rain. It is not necessary. Even though it may be time for school or trainings, keep the girls in the cottage until the shower lets up. School and training teachers should keep the girls also if it is raining too hard. Will the hospital please keep the girls there during a hard rain? Particularly, do not send the girls on errands. They can wait. I certainly do not want to see any more girls going out in the spring during a downpour of rain. Thank you. June 30th, 1939. Lots of memos. The following are instructions for taking your girls on walks during the summer months. You may walk up the back road as far north as you can go. Go south, do not go quite as far as Twin Lakes. So if you're in the area, you might know where Twin Lakes are. You may walk east and west on the side road as far as you wish. There is now a great deal of traffic on Route 257, River Road. Do not take the girls on that road at all during the summer months. Girls who pick up cigarette butts during walks are to be deprived of their walk for a few weeks, depending on the seriousness and frequency of the offense. They may be locked in their rooms and left there while the remainder of the girls go out walking. But I would encourage you to take the girls out for walks as often as possible. I would not like to work for her. August 16th, 1939. To all matrons, I have been hearing continual reports about the way in which the girls are dressed when they leave the cottage. They absolutely must not wear halter dresses. I am holding the matrons responsible for this, and I mean business. Please collect the halters so they can't do it again. August 25th, 1939. To all matrons, I'm going to permit the girls to use lipstick. They are, of course, to use it in moderation and for dress occasions only. Dress up? Oh well, maybe church, I don't know. Please do not permit the girls to ask for lipstick on store order. So there was a store they could buy things if they have very little money. So if they don't have much money, then don't let them try and buy it. They should use that money for things that are more necessary than lipstick. To all matrons, December 28, 1939. It should not be necessary for me to send a notice again about the way the girls are dressed when they go out on the line. Now, you saw this slide about the line. The matrons are employed to look after the girls, and I'm holding them entirely responsible for the way the girls are dressed. The girls must not wear anklets when they go out of the cottage. Plenty of socks at the store. And she goes on and on. It's a very long memo. I think there's one more. Notice regarding clothing worn in the cottage. Housecoats, pajamas, slacks, culottes, overalls, etc. are not to be worn in the living room or the dining room at any time. Okay, that was in January of 1940. And then my favorite part, razors. This is June 13th, 1939. Matrons, will you please see that your girls use a safety razor for underarm care regularly? There are plenty of razors, or plenty of blades in the storeroom if you need them. So the razors were obviously kept locked up, but they needed to get them from the storeroom, supervised, and so on. They needed to use those razors on their underarms. To all matrons, this is November 22nd, 1939. Is it possible that some of the new members of the staff do not have the information about the use of razors and razor blades for keeping their underarms clean? It should not be necessary to remind older members of the staff that the underarms of the girls are to be kept cleanly shaven under supervision of the house mother or relief matron. If it is necessary to make a ceremony of this, do so. In bold type, check up on your girls frequently and be sure that no girl is allowed to go with hair under her arms. It is embarrassing to have a girl appear before the physician in this unkempt, unclean, and unsanitary condition. You can see why this is my favorite. You can get razors and razor blades at the store. Be sure to keep them under your own care, under lock and key. It has been brought to my attention by the hospital that girls are not being required to use safety razors for underarm care. Numerous notices have been sent out concerning this matter, and I must insist that this order be carried out. Poor lady. I feel sorry for her, almost. Now, on the question of food, I love these. July 1939. Girls must eat the vegetables prepared for their meals. No vegetables, no desserts. Ice cream, pie, cake, etc. may be omitted until the girls learn to eat the vegetables served to them. Again, they grew the vegetables, they have to eat them. Please serve the vegetables as soon as they are brought to the cottage. We are getting an abundance of apples, and we want the girls to have all they can use. Use them for meals and send a pan of apples to the front house. I don't know what that front house was. For the use of the girls in the evening. Please serve the apples cooked for meals. Serving raw apples for dessert is a lazy way of preparing a meal. So each individual cottage had their own cook, and they cooked their meals. I do not approve of it. Make pies, apple dumplings, apple sauce, etc. The girls should learn how to make these things as well as have the pleasure of eating them. And Here's some more things having to do with food. Or other things, not just food. I have learned recently that it is the custom for all the beds to be made before they go to breakfast. She doesn't want them to do that. She wants them to put their covers back so that the covers can, or the bedding can air out, and then they can make their beds after breakfast. Train the girls to do this, okay? There is no excuse for girls going to their training late either. The girls must return to training right after breakfast and lunch. And then at night, 1940. There must be absolute quiet in the cottage before breakfast in the morning, and then again at night. Girls are permitted to talk in the dining room, but only in normal conversational tone. I'm sure all these girls knew what a normal conversational tone was in the homes that they grew up in. I'm also giving the authority to spank with a rubber shoe any girl who becomes obstreperous. Any girl who talks back or is defiant is to be put in her room and her clothes taken away. Those who are particularly ugly will have everything removed and from their rooms except the bed, and will be locked in with a key. Girls who have been particularly disobedient during the past few days are to be put in their rooms this afternoon. So she was kind of upset about that. And she was also upset about library books disappearing. They were taking too many library books. Ink, pens, they were taking too many of those. So that was Rose Beatty. And then the runaway logs. I'm not going to read all these to you, but there is a log, and I have seen it when I went to the Ohio History Connection. They had this notebook, and they kept a log of all the runaways, who went, where, how they got out, who caught them, when, and so on. And this was particularly of interest to me because when I lived on Home Road, I lived in a lane, so it was a private lane, and they weren't allowed to come back and look for the girls there, as I think I previously said. So I didn't lock my car. I don't know, I would today, but I didn't. And it was parked in a carport, so bright and early one Saturday morning, I go out to go get donuts at Tuller's. Remember Tuller's? Best donuts in the world. But I saw a flashlight sitting on the ground of my carport. It was early in the morning, so I wasn't firing on all cylinders. I thought, that's strange. Opened the door, and I had a little hatchback, and this girl was sleeping in the back of my vehicle. And of course I screamed and slammed the door. That woke her up. And she jumped out, and she asked me to drive her to Akron. And I no. So I ran in the house, locked the door, and called the number that I had for the switchboard, and reported her as being found. And she probably had escaped sometime in the night. I don't know how she got away, but again, there were no fences on the girls' setting. So she, of course, ran away. She went back to the neighbors and got on a tractor and tried to steal the tractor to drive. So there is a Facebook group that I came across. And it's a Facebook group for girls who had been incarcerated. And I, of course, left off the names. But they were asked, it was a person who started this, didn't work there, didn't have, to my knowledge, didn't have a real connection with any particular person. But she was doing some research. So she asked for girls' testimonials. And she said, this girl wrote, I couldn't help but to leave a message. I was admitted to Scioto Village, which was by the end of the name, in January of '93. I was 16 and 6 months pregnant. While I was there, we were still in the old buildings, but then 3 months later, they moved to the newly built ones that were more like prison cells. I think about that place from time to time. When I was there, it was a place for girls who committed crimes, and we had 4 different cottages. One was called Davy. This was for the older girls that had jobs outside on the campus. In early years, some of the girls were sent as indentured servants to people in the community. So, but these girls, some of the girls in Davy did have jobs elsewhere. And then there was Mapledale, the cottage I was on. It was for the young and immature girls. Then there was Buckeye. That was the hodgepodge cottage. I guess they couldn't put the girls in a particular category. Then there was Almond. I think that's how you spell it. This was the majority of girls that had committed serious crimes like murder. I used to say to my mom, well, it's not like they have murderers over there. Going, yeah, they do. And then across the street there was Riverdale. She called it Riverdale, but it was Riverview for the boys. Halloween of that year, we had a Halloween dance with the boys. And that same night, one of the girls on my cottage committed suicide in her room. That place was crazy, but it taught me a lot about myself. So I think it's, it's tragic that that one girl who obviously had mental health issues did take her own life. And that was the only suicide that they had ever had there that we know of. Somebody else wrote, at the time of my incarceration, I was an unruly teen. My father had died and my mother began to drink too much, and I was pretty much on my own at 13 to 14. I don't want to imply that I loved the place, but some of the staff there were motherly to me, and I really needed that. I was kind of messed up and confused at the time. Anyway, the grounds were beautiful, and I think I developed a love of old architecture there. LOL. I hope they didn't demolish all those old buildings. Guess what? They did. Just wanted to add my 2 cents. The place wasn't all that bad. Now I put these as good example, where the place did really help the girls. But there were a number of girls who wrote in and told of punishments like scrubbing bathroom floors with a toothbrush on their hands and knees and so on. Another sad thing was that if they were pregnant, many of them, their babies were given up for adoption, not with the girl's permission. And you wonder, why didn't the babies go to the parents? Well, possibly the reason the girl was there was the family situation. So, and my mom would say that the girls couldn't work on their problems until after the baby was born. And I can understand that. But can you just feel the grief of these girls who many times wanted to keep their babies. And in this blog, or whatever it is, Facebook page, many were trying to find their babies. They were writing in, I had a baby on this and such a date. And as a mother and a grandmother, that just breaks my heart. So the name changed. Started out State Reform and Industrial School for Girls, then the Girls Industrial Home, Girls Industrial School, and then the Ohio Youth Commission took it over, and then it became Scioto Village, Scioto Juvenile Correctional Facility, and eventually Riverview Correctional Facility. And I wasn't able to find the dates for all those, and I don't know that it matters, but it's just the fact that it just kept changing names. So here it is when I lived across the road, Department of Youth Services. My youngest son, Chris, played with the superintendent's son named Wyatt. And so he was on the grounds because the superintendent lived on grounds, but not in that fancy building because it was all gone. So we had a little bit of experience with it. Here's the aerial view, and you can see eventually they did have fences and barbed wire and all kinds of protection for the kids or the neighbors. This is all that's left, the gazebo, and you can see in the background where all those buildings would have been. So I took this picture on July 12th of this year, and with my little phone. But you can see where the buildings would have been. The cemetery is over on the left side, but it's not in view. And then you saw the picture of the Home Road Bridge. Here it is now. The modern bridge. When I lived there for I think the whole time I lived there, there was this big green bridge. And I was terrified of bridges growing up because my brother would say, we're crossing a bridge, we're crossing a bridge. And it was 2 lanes, but you were happier when it was one, when there was nobody coming, you could go down the center. But now there's this nice bridge and then the docks. So, any questions?
level?
Okay, so it was, the cottages and all those older buildings, they were from the Victorian age, they were really hard to heat. They had their own heating plant. They were just really hard to supervise, so they made modern buildings. Now, why were those modern buildings, everything was taken down because it was acquired by the city of Columbus and it's going to be a water treatment plant. So the gazebo will be accessible to the public, and then the cemetery, as I mentioned. So that's, everything else is gone. So, Julia.
Or they can make that area a museum-like, with information about it.
I don't know, that would be interesting to see if they are going to have any information. I think that there should be a plaque, and possibly the Historical Society could take a step to do that, you know, because the city of Columbus isn't going to do it, you know, so, but we could put one of those historical markers or two there. And I know that there's plans to do something like that at the cemetery, but I mean, at the gazebo they should. Now, I said this is the only building left, or the previous one, the gazebo, but there is a building that was on the grounds. So if you are on Home Road, over on the right side on the corner of 745 and Home Road, there is a really nice home with big trees. It was in the news several years ago because they were going to put a roundabout there and it was going to take down the trees. That home was originally on the grounds of the White Sulphur Springs, and it was moved. So it exists, but it isn't on the grounds where it used to be. A family, well, a man named Larry Doolin lives there. So.
If I remember right, when we went to go see the plays there, we were given no opportunity to look around. You went to the parking lots and you went straight in, and I mean, it was no.
Yeah, exactly. You could go in the parking lot, park, go in. I don't have much memory of the grounds there at all, and it's silly because I lived so close, but you weren't allowed on the grounds. Yeah, and for good reason. Yeah, our protection and theirs.
I remember they issued a warning every once in a while, especially when someone escaped from the boys' school.
And you know, several people have mentioned that to me, that there were warnings that boys had escaped. I didn't get them. I mean, occasionally my mom would call and tell me, but I didn't get the warnings.
It was by phone, I think, and we were on the other side of the river, 3 miles up. Yeah. And we did get them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes some of the boys especially would hide in the cornfield. There's a cornfield across from where I live. There's a big park, nice park there. So they would hide in the cornfield because they didn't know where to go. They were from all over the state. And, or they would try to swim the river. Good luck with that. Yeah. But, and I heard that one of the reasons they closed the facility, and when it was closed, there were only like maybe 50 kids there, 30 boys, the rest were girls. And it was because they needed to have them more closer to the families where they were from, because the families couldn't all come visit. You know, we're a central location, but if you're up in Toledo or Youngstown or anywhere else, they may not have the transportation to come and visit their kids. But yeah, it's interesting. I didn't get those. Another thing that I heard was this: you had to dial from some homes. You had to dial. Well, from my house, I had to dial 7 to get out of my. To call anybody, I had to dial 7 first. And there was one home, at least one home, where kids escaped, broke into the house, tried to call out, and couldn't because they didn't know that you had to dial 7 first. So of course they destroyed the house. That helped. That helped their case.
As far as them getting to a point where they could leave where they were, was there, and when the girls, like I'm talking early 1900s and before that, were they just released on their own and they had to fend for themselves, or how, do you know how that was
I don't
handled?
know. That's a good question to pursue. Was there a halfway house? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Some of them had been trained for certain employments and so on. So, yeah, don't know.
had been really hard for women in the day.
It would have been hard, and as I said in that earlier part of the program, the public was kind of leery of these girls. They had, you know, they came from a reform school. And you know, you might feel that way too. So, ex-cons, do you want them working in your store? Taking care of your kids? Maybe, maybe not.
But that wasn't really the truth for some of them.
No, it wasn't the truth for some of them. You know, some of them had horrible situations that they needed to escape from. So I said it was a resort. It was White Sulphur Springs Resort, very fashionable, where people would come for the mineral waters. I wonder if those waters are still around.
Yes.
Are they?
Yeah. The gazebo there,
Yeah.
they hook it up to the pipe to the water, yeah. But
Okay.
of course, it's disconnected now, but the gazebo's still there.
Here's an auditorium and classrooms. The school was described as being the new school, built in 1897, torn down in 1992.
The first one is the old gym.
Yeah, it was a gym.
That was the gym.
Yeah, so my identification came from some of the literature or some of the pictures that we had. So maybe some things changed over the years.
It was
So,
always, well, it was always the gym as far as I know.
okay.
And that's the school building.
In the
Yeah.
70s, it was still the gym.
70s, it was still the gym? Okay. Yes.
An original building from the resort is across the road. They moved it over across the road. It's across from that bake shop.
So there is a house across from the bake shop. It was a bait store when I lived in the area. And the front part of that is Larry Doolin's house. The front part of that did belong to the resort, and it was moved. So that's the only existing building, but it's not on the original site.
How and why were the girls assigned to the buildings?
How and why were the girls assigned to the buildings? I do have a little bit of a clue. Do you want to tell?
They were signed by age, and they did something called an evaluation.
I'm going to repeat what you said. They were assigned by age, and also they did an evaluation of the severity of their crime, if they were
Not crime,
offense.
with the offense, they were all committed, that's what we, and so you didn't have a regular time you didn't stay.
Dave?
I started working down on Wheatwood Avenue in 1967, before we even opened Riverview. And of course, Scioto had been there for a century by then, not a century. And the girls in the 60s, 70s were considered incorrigible by a judge, which could be anything from running away, drug abuse, school truancy, getting pregnant. And so they did not enact the talk of felonious behavior until later, and then it definitely became toward the end that you only were there if you were convicted of juvenile delinquency on the basis of behavior that would have been a felony if you had been tried as an adult.
Okay. Any other comments on that? Somebody else had a hand up.
I was there in the early 70s, and the assessment was to determine basically how aggressive the girls were or passive. And so the really aggressive ones were together. Age from about 13 to 18, county judges sends them to come here. And when the staff decided that they were ready to return to their community, maybe their family, maybe foster home, maybe group home, they would have to petition the judge to allow them to come back in the community. And some of the judges did not want them back in there. Now, we couldn't hold them beyond 21. I mean, most of the girls I worked with were there either because they ran away from home or they were truant from school. That was it.
Yeah.
What era are we talking about?
Early 70s.
Early 70s.
I was early 70s, my cottage was 18 to 21, and I had basically kids who were drug addicts, working the streets, crazy some of them, and kids that had murdered. They were serious offenders. So, what she's talking about is status offenders that we're trying to do away with between the time of 70 and 76.
So what year were you there for years?
I I started in 1970.
Okay, okay. And so when I'm talking about the history, obviously it's a very long history, and things changed over years.
Well, they was trying to change it then so we didn't have kids committed just for being pregnant or runaways.
Right, right. Yes.
What happened with the girls after they had their babies?
What happened with the girls after they had their babies?
They came back to
They stayed until their time was up or whatever, the baby. So I've read a number, there are some blogs that I have read, some of them are so sad. Some of the girls' babies were given away, put up for adoption. And I had the impression, them reading what the girl wrote, that they had no choice, that the girl wasn't given a choice in that. And then I'm thinking,
That's the girl's family took the babies.
the girl's family, some of them, in some cases, I had the impression, again, I'm just what I've read, that parents didn't always take them. But then I'm wondering, well, maybe part of the reason the girl is where she is because the home life was not good. Yeah. He's got.
Again, the 70s was a big change. They had a cottage for girls that were pregnant, and they broke that up about in the mid-70s. And then, at one point before I was there in 70, there was a scandal about the kids' children's babies that they had being sold.
Oh.
And so that changed, and the kids went to children's services. Children's services, the county they were from, decided.
Okay.
When the city of Columbus takes over, they will still have access to that cemetery.
Yes, you said when the city of Columbus takes over, and they kind of have, because there are no trespassing signs everywhere, then they will eventually give us access to it, but it will not be all closed up.
The girls buried in the cemetery were orphans.
The girls were
had no
orphans?
family. And I believe, I took pictures of all the tombstones. I believe there's one with Ferris's name on it.
There might be.
I'm not sure. But,
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
the girls buried there died of tuberculosis or typhoid, and they're the girls that had no family.
Where were these announcements posted?
Okay, all of these I found on Find a Grave. The person who took the pictures and did the memorials put these on there, so I did not go searching for them.
And they didn't provide where they found them?
No, they did not provide where they found them. I can find out, maybe tomorrow. I have no idea what this is, but I thought it was really cute.
George Washington Day, President's Day, they had floats and stuff.
President's Day, they had floats and things.
Yeah, and that's like George Washington thing.
So, what year would you say, what kind of decade do you think that would
I
be?
don't know. And that's another gazebo. That gazebo's gone.
Okay, didn't know there was another gazebo.
Yeah, it might have been the 4th of July.
Yeah, because they had a big celebration in the 70s for 4th of July.
70s, 4th of July. Yeah, my mom took part in some of those celebrations, and I'm not sure the years. They had, the school that they attended was William K. Willis High School. And so that's what their diploma would be. Yes.
Big Bill Willis was a football player at Ohio State. He was the first man inducted to both the college and professional football Hall of Fame.
Can you hear him?
And he was made director of the Department of Youth Services. Wonderful man. And they named the school after him. And then the school name was also used for Riverview across the road, which were two separate schools and things.
And Riverview was not always just for girls, it was also boys.
It became boys after the
Boys.
First 10 years.
difficult girls were sent to Riverview.
First 10 years was girls, and then it switched to all boys.
Okay. Wish I had seen this log cabin, I think it's so cute.
They burned it down when Mr. Starkey was there. When they brought the boys up, there was no fence or anything, and they burned that cottage down.
The adults did or the kids did?
The superintendent had the cottage burned down.
This is sort of gardening. They look like they're having fun. I don't know, maybe they just like having their picture taken. And then the rabbit house. Yes.
Scioto was here, and across the street was vacant land, and they farmed all that land. They canned their tomatoes and everything. They farmed that area until the Riverview Cottage was built.
When it says gardening for 3.5 hours in the morning, were they working in the garden?
Yes.
Or were they playing on
Every
swings?
cottage had its own garden.
Okay.
And then they went across the road and they had tomatoes and things that they canned and other vegetables. They grew most of their own food.
Yeah, they grew most of their own food, so each cottage would have a garden, like a little kitchen garden, I'm thinking, and then they had a big farm garden.
And when the class schedule said laundry and sewing and industrial arts, were they actually doing the laundry?
Yes.
In the 70s and 80s, the old laundry room was still there and still being used. They switched to washing and drying and machines in the cottage, but I don't know what year they got rid of the laundry room, but it was there for a long time. It was there in the 80s, I know. The old laundry room is still there in the 70s. I don't know when they got rid of, I can't remember, it was like in the 80s or 90s that they got rid of the laundry room. And staff, the math teacher and the home ec teacher lived above in the top of the ad building. And they had their laundry done there. And they ate at the cafeteria, their meals. And they didn't pay rent or anything to live in the ad building.
Mm-hmm.
But they had their own bakery, which was amazing. And then, of course, cosmetology finally came.
Mm-hmm.
And the girls made their own clothes there.
Wow.
And then when I went there, the girls could wear clothes from home.
That was probably really helpful to them.
When Mr. Starkey came, he brought the jumpsuits. And the girls wore orange jumpsuits. And Riverview School was named for Riverview Cottage, which was the colored girls' cottage.
Oh.
And the girls at Scioto could not handle our help, went across the road to Riverview.
Okay.
That was the step before Marysville.
Okay, the next step was Marysville. If they didn't shape up, they would ship out.
And by across the road, do you mean where the park is now? Where the administrator's building is?
Where Riverview was.
South of the park a bit, same
Yeah,
side of
it's-
the road.
Okay.
Scioto Village gave land to the fire department there at Scioto, the first fire department. Scioto Village gave them that land so they could, do emergency rooms or runs of fires. And then the land across the road also belonged to the school and Riverview and all that, all the way to Home Road. And then that went to Concord Township, and they built the building.
You have a question?
Yeah, and maybe one of the workers that worked there, was there ever a program, maybe in the 50s, where some high school boys would go down there and they'd have a dance?
Ohio Wesleyan men came down
Okay.
for the dance.
My brother did that, and
Yeah.
in my poor brain, it just told me of something, okay.
Eventually, they had dances with the other institutions,
yeah.
but at one time, the boys from Ohio Wesleyan came down and danced with the girls, and the girls dressed up in prom dresses and stuff.
And shaved their arms.
There's the gazebo.
The gazebo has the Concord grapevines on it because the settlers who came to Ohio brought the Concord grape
Okay.
to Delaware County, and those are the grapevines on it. In the middle is an urn, and the pipe underneath spewed water up into that urn. Mr. Freshwater owned the land where Scioto Village is, and he dynamited the river to get salt. When he dynamited the river, sulfur water came up. And because he was not interested in sulfur water, he sold the land to a developer who made it into a big resort. People from the south came to the resort. A lot of famous people came to the resort. And the women would promenade around, and the men would gamble, and they would bathe or drink the sulfur water for health. After the Civil War, the southern people tried to come back again. But the people in the north were not friendly, and so no one would come, and the developer sold the land to the state. I guess he went bankrupt. At first, it was just an institution for girls who needed a home or an orphanage. Years later, it became for girls that were in trouble. I was gonna tell you, I knew the girl who committed suicide. I had her in class.
Oh,
She didn't go to the dance that night, and Miss Knoll discovered her body, and it really affected Mrs. Knoll. But in class, I would tell the girls things about Scioto Village, and she would always say, "Tell about the girl who committed suicide." I said, "No girls ever committed suicide here. You know, that's no story here." And then on Halloween night, she stayed back from the dance and hung herself. And I'll tell you about another girl, Kathy, we got. Kathy's judge was Judge Barbuto in Akron. If you were a woman and went before him, he would tell you in his chamber, if you will have sex with me or prostitute for me, you will be released. Kathy went before Judge Barbuto in Akron, and he told her that, and she said no, she would not do that. So he sent her to Scioto, and he would not let her leave, and he kept her there for a long time. And also, it's a long time ago, they farmed the girls out to the farmers in the area, and they worked for the local farmers. And one other story I'll tell you, we got a letter from a lady in Florida. She worked for NASA. She was 60 years old and retiring. And she said, "I want to thank Scioto, not Scioto then, but I want to thank you that she went to Florida and worked for NASA for 30 years. We had a lot of girls that married doctors and made it and did well. But anyway, it was a great place to work and great staff. We had a lot of women that did a lot for the girls and men.
I need to get your name and contact information. I do.
Okay. Anyway, we were so sad when they tore down the old buildings because they were gorgeous, beautiful buildings. Scioto Village was a show place at one time. People came there to see the flowers and everything, and they had a lot of exotic trees and things. The girls in the beginning would come to the train station in, is it Mill Center? There's a little town up there where the girls would come.
White Sulphur?
Well, anyway, Scioto would send a horse and buggy to pick them up at the train station because they came all over the state. Anyway, it was a show place for a long time. Then they started cutting down the trees and they tore down the buildings. I worked in a school building, and I think some of the buildings were the walls were 3 bricks thick. And at Scioto Cottage, they had rooms in the basement where a lot of the girls were put. And one lady told me that she came there and her goal was to get the girls out of those rooms.
Tell me about the whistle, because I would hear the whistle every afternoon. So what's the purpose of the whistle? Was that quitting time?
Noon and quitting time.
Okay.
I can't think of his name now, but anyway, he was coming to work and he went across the bridge down there in Shawnee Hills, and he saw a girl, okay? So he grabbed her and put her in his car. And she said, "Oh, no," she said, "I'm not a Scioto girl." And yeah, he said, "You're a Scioto girl. You're going with me to Scioto." And he took her to Scioto, but she was a local girl.
That's just why my mother didn't want my kids to be out.
And then we had 2 girls that ran, and they went to Mr. Riddle's house. He taught at Riverview. And they knocked on the door and they said, "Our boyfriend put us out here, and we need to use your phone to call for someone to come give us a ride." "Yeah, right," he said, and he called Scioto. And we had, one year we had a drought here, and the Scioto River got real small, and 3 girls swam across the river. And Mr. Starkey was there then. The men used to get in the cars and just go every which way, and they had a bad wreck, and Ernie was injured. So they said, "No more running around like that." So they stationed you at certain places, and Mr. Doherty was across the river at the dock where they have the boats. And he's standing there, and he heard somebody cough, and he looked down, and there's the 3 girls. So anyway, Mr. Knowles was a social worker for one of the girls, and the next day her mother called, and she said, "Don't let my daughter do any hard work. She's got a bad heart." He said, "Don't call me here and tell me your daughter has a bad heart when she just swam across the Scioto River." there's just a lot of stories there. I'll tell you one more story. Mr. Flomo was at Woodbine Cottage up on the hill, and he's playing catch. And Kathy, one of the girls, ran down the hill and jumped in the river. And Mr. Flomo got in his car, you could drive around, and he hit a tree. And this Mr. Shutt, Mark Shutt, and Ed Heller, we had canoes from the boys' school. They jumped in a canoe and went out in the river. And the canoe turned over, and Mark swam over and saved Kathy and took her out on the land. And Ed's hanging onto the canoe, and the supervisor, he's walking up and down the riverbank. Anyway, Kathy got out, and she said she's very angry that Mr. Shutt pulled her out of the river, and she let him have it, you know, so angry that he would do that. But anyway, it was like a circus, you know. Bobo hit a tree, the canoe turns over, Ed's holding on the canoe, and Mark's swimming and forcing Kathy out. Anyway, and we had a lot of girls that did well.
Yeah.
I remember back in, I want to say the 50s and 60s, my mother would drive nuns from Delaware St. Mary down during the week to the industrial school to meet with some of the girls. And I wonder what kind of program you had for religious education, or we saw a choir, and I wonder what was the background there.
I don't know about that. There's some of the, yes.
At least in the 70s, and they had a church service.
They had a church service in the 70s. My mom was friends with Reverend Selfridge, and some of you may have known him. I have a piece of furniture that was his that she bought from him, I think.
Ancient show us.
What?
Ancient show us.
And they had Father McEwen, who was here at St. Mary, was also on staff there, as was, there was a Protestant minister too, several Protestant ministers.
Yeah.
So they had both kinds, both services.
I think I can speak for everybody who worked at Scioto or Riverview with the boys or the girls, that we had a lot of good employees who really wanted to do that work because they thought they could make an impact, be a positive adult role model for some very troubled kids. We also were realistic, knowing that we weren't doing miracles with hundreds of girls and boys every year. And the records show there was recidivism after they left. Some of them graduated to more severe criminality. But all in all, it was a great effort. And I think most of it's done in the community now, with only 3 institutions left run by the state in Ohio. At one time, there must have been, what, 13 or, it was a large number. One of the problems with parents who cared about their children who were sent to Scioto Village was they sent them from all over the state. So if you lived in Cleveland and your daughter was sent to Scioto Village because she was drug abusing or got pregnant out of wedlock and they decided she was incorrigible, visitation was very difficult. So it was normally on a weekend and a special arrangement other times. And back to your point about the seemed to be concentration on straight razors, safety razors. You ever think of leaving a razor blade around kids who want to cause trouble, hurt themselves or others? As Barb has pointed out, if you go to work at a place like that, they will explain how a ballpoint pen can be deadly. A rolled up group of pencils. I know of times when we crawled around on the floor looking for a needle or a straight pin used in home economics class, because all of them had to be accounted for because kids would eat them or insert them subcutaneously. And actually they would put a number of things down their throat or wherever. So some bizarre war stories and that kind of work. And I think Bev has done a really good job of researching the history before any of us were there.
I think we could probably talk a lot longer, but I'm sure that your seats are, your sitters are tired of sitting. So thank you, and thank you to everybody who came and helped.